Now, before you get into this podcast, I know what you're thinking. You've probably checked social media and you've seen the news about Jorge Martin. And yes, in true podcasting fashion, we were recording the podcast this morning, reviewing the French Grand Prix. And as soon as we finished, the news had started to filter out from motorsport.com and, of course, a number of Spanish publications, AS being one of them, saying that Jorge Martin is trying to get out of his Aprilia contract for the end of the 2025 season. There's a clause in there that says it's around performance, and he can get out of the contract if Aprilia aren't meeting that in terms of bike performance and standing in the World Championship. We'll have a full reaction to this, I think, in a few days' time when we know more. We've asked Aprilia for a comment on it. They've came back to us and said they won't be commenting on the matter. So, yeah, take of that what you will. But I do think there's a few questions that immediately come out. If Jorge is going to leave Aprilia, where is he going to go? What team is he going to ride for? What manufacturer? Yeah, a lot of questions this time of year. There's always seems to be a bombshell in MotoGP. And this is that one with Jorge. Is he jumping the gun too early? It's worth adding as well that AS also reported that Martin is giving them 6 races from his return to try and convince him to stay. But I don't know if you've already started the chain reaction of saying that you're thinking of leaving. Your mind's already kind of made up there, and you're trying to get out of it in any way possible. So yeah, we'll see what happens with Jorge, and if anything is going to come out of it. But yeah, like I say, we just know that Aprilia have no official comment. They aren't commenting on the matter. And yeah, we'll have more reaction to this throughout the week. There's plenty of stuff on crash.net. We have got a lot on social media as well covering it. So if you're interested in reading more about the Jorge Martin situation, head across to our website, head across to social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, Blue Sky, wherever you want. We're on there. And yeah, enjoy the review of the French Grand Prix in full. We talk about Johann Zarco's fantastic win and much more. And I'll catch you next time. Well, where do you start with that one there? French Grand Prix. Well, we had a French pole sitter. I thought that was pretty impressive. But to get a French winner of the French Grand Prix with Johann Zarco, I think everyone's pretty happy there. Welcome back to the Christ MotoGP podcast. Joining me, Jordan Moreland, to discuss it all is Pete McLaren and Lewis Duncan. I kind of joked in the last podcast, boys, that if a Honda won, I'd be claiming it. Because I kind of was jokingly saying that Joan Mir was going to win. I mean, Honda did end the Ducati streak, which is very ironic, isn't it, Pete, with the 22... Well, they're both matched now, aren't they? 22 each. And yeah, for a Frenchman on a Honda to do it at home, I mean, sometimes the script is nicely put, isn't it?
It is, yeah. What a race. I mean, that's one that we'll all remember for a long time, let alone Zarco, LCR, and those, was it 120,000 odd fans? I mean, it's... We've all done it. It's not fun sometimes standing in the rain, is it, for hours on end? But I think none of them will care after that result, will they? I mean, all that early chaos, we're all waiting to see how it was going to play out. Lewis, unfortunately, is trying to do it live blogging. There's all this stuff. How's this all going to end up? And then everything, the clouds cleared, if you like, but it was the opposite. It got worse. And there's Zarco with that 8-second lead, and it almost wasn't a surprise, was it? It wasn't a shock. It was just, of course, it's just going to go this way because he's great in the wet. The Honda had gone well in warm up, but of course it's that home fan thing. We spoke about it, as you say, in the last podcast about the French guys doing something special at home, and it just all seemed that like destined to happen, didn't it, from that moment? But there he is, 8 seconds ahead. But then Marc Marquez, he's on new wet tyres, and 8 seconds in those kind of conditions is not a given with so much of the race left. So there was a lot still to do, and he did it, didn't he? Faultless. I mean, nearly 20 seconds by the end of the race. Lucio Cecchinello tried to slow him down, and just an unforgettable race, a dream result for everybody involved in the LCR project and all those French fans.
Absolutely, and I will say, Lewis, hats off for the live blog as well, because it is chaotic and it's just trying to work out what was happening in those early laps it was manic, but it almost actually was nearly over for Zarco at the very start as he get caught up in that incident with Bastianini, Bagnaia and Mir. He had to take avoiding actions through the gravel, and it's really strange in how like that was kind of nearly the story was gone almost there. We could even maybe forgot about that if it's just crashed out. But like, what do you think of that in terms of history? It's something that's just great, isn't it, for the sport and just for Zarco especially, because we talked about in the last podcast how the French fans really resonated with him. And like now he's just created this bond for life with him. They'll never forget where they were when they seen him win.
Yeah, it's funny because on Friday that we wrote like, oh well, there's two kind of French sort of representatives there after practice. It looked like they could really do something special. One was Fabio Quartararo, and the other one was Maverick Vinales on the Tech 3 KTM. And it kind of looked like that was going to be the way it was going to go after the sprint if the race remained dry. Quartararo had really good, strong race pace. So did Marc Marquez, but like there was it looked like, maybe Quartararo and Vinales could well have been podium favourites in a dry race, and it was going to be a great day for the French crowd. And this rain comes around, and and we all sort of assumed that if the rain stayed, it was probably going to go Mark's way anyway, or if it, when the flag-to-flag situation, he'd come on the dry tyres. Those are conditions that really suit him. But you've got to, fair play to LCR. They were convinced. They were constantly monitoring the weather radar during the aborted start, and they went to Zarco and were like, "We are convinced that the wet tyres, this will get worse in 20 minutes. Just persevere with the wet tyres." And he was like, "Okay, I trust you." And like you say, Jordan, it really backfired because Zarco took his own decision to not engage any of the ride height devices for the start because he was like, "I don't know if I'm going to build up enough speed on wet tyres on a dry-ish track to be able to disengage it." So that meant he dropped all the way from 11th all the way down the field, and then was in that pinch point when Bastianini tried his just ridiculously shoddy attempt at an overtake over a wet curb on slick tyres. I don't really know what he was thinking. That took out Bagnaia, that took out Joan Mir, and on the outside of that was Johann Zarco, who went through the gravel as well. So it wasn't just that he'd survived contact; he'd survived going through the gravel as well. And you kind of didn't realise that at the point when he led the race. It wasn't until they showed a replay you were like, "Oh my god, he was
last. He was dead last. So he was, yeah.
But they gambled on the strategy and they won. The rain got worse. Like runners started crashing. They started coming into the pits. There was one rider that was more in the pound seat, I think, to take a big result on Sunday, and that was Jack Miller, who crashed out unfortunately when conditions started to get a bit worse. And that's when really just everything opened up for Zarco, and a lot of racing is just luck, and you have to make the most of it, and that's what he did. The 8-second lead. Mark pushed those first couple of laps. He's on the wet tyres, and he couldn't really get much out of Zarco. He got half a second, a few tenths here and there, but it wasn't really enough to risk it. And that's we'll get onto that shortly, because that's a key thing that helped Zarco there, was that Mark wasn't in a position to risk after crashing at Jerez, after crashing in Austin, knowing what was happening to his title rivals behind him, knowing that Alex Marquez was behind him at that point. There was no risk. There was no sense risking to push, and Zarco, he was given a free run really to do what he wanted, and he was brilliant. He was at points he was a lap a second quicker. He didn't need to be 20 seconds ahead, but clearly when you're in a groove like that, when you're in the rhythm, you kind of have to go with it, because if you try backing off, you're going to go, "Oh, be nervous." That's when accidents happen. He kept the temperature in the tyres, because the rain levels changed quite a lot. We got points where it came a bit heavier, then it dried up a bit, and then it got heavier again. And when you've got worn tyres, that's if you burn up your tyres when it's a bit drier, then that becomes harder when it gets wetter, and it's just, and if you're first on track, you're the one discovering the conditions for the first time. So to do all those things while still pushing was really, really, full credit to Zarco. And what a result! First French Grand Prix winner since 1954, and the first time ever a French rider in the Premier Class has won at Le Mans as well.
Yeah, that's right.
That 1954 race, Pierre Monneray was at Reims. So, it's history in two parts, which and for it to be Zarco to do that as well, I mean.
Yeah, it's cool. Like, it's the oldest rider on the grid as well to do it. I think it's amazing. So it is. I think Pete, his mum turns up for the first time in 17 years of his Grand Prix racing career to watch him, and he's like, "Oh, you should come along and watch. You should experience the French crowd." I mean, if she thinks just by chance the first race she goes to is I'd say it's his crowning moment. It's his best moment he's ever going to have. I'd say it even eclipses his 2 Moto2 world titles, which is, to do it in that atmosphere. he wants his mum at every race now, probably, doesn't he? Because he's thinking, are you a good luck charm after all these years? And seeing his dad, how emotional he was, and it was proper, wasn't it? Even though, as Lewis says, at moments you were kind of wishing he would slow down because he was so fast. And that's the bit I couldn't get over. I was like, please, Johann, just slow down. You don't need to be as quick. Mark's not going to catch you anymore. At that point, it was so impressive of a ride. It showed all his skill and just how good he is in those conditions. It was perfect, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, as you say, with all that pressure, with all the fans and everything else, say, inviting his family along to experience that atmosphere, it just all comes together for him. But you can see what it meant to him, wasn't he? He was visibly emotional, wasn't he, on the podium? And we're leaving Parc Fermé to celebrate with the fans as well. That was a great gesture, wasn't it? And really soaking up the moment. And just brilliant for everyone. Brilliant for MotoGP as a whole, as a sport, as a spectacle. Good to have a different winner. Sorry to Ducati that their win run is broken. It's going to take 22 races. It's a long time to build up, isn't it? But there we go, and it's Honda, who they are tied with, that end up breaking that run for Ducati. But this is what we want to see. We want to see different winners, whether it's riders, whether it's bikes. And Zarco took a lot of criticism when he left Ducati to go to LCR and Honda, didn't he? People saying he's just taking the money and whatever else. Here he is. He's ended up back on the top step. He's now won one for Ducati, and he's won one on the Honda, and at a perfect time for his contract negotiations as well, as he pushes to sort of move into the factory team next year. So all round perfect day for him, just under those circumstances, for things to work out so well. And Lewis makes a good point about the strategy. Normally in those kind of conditions, you do what Marc Marquez and the others did, which is you go with the tyres for that moment, don't you? Or for the next 1 or 2 laps. That's normally what you do. You don't try and look too far ahead, because if you've got a thunderstorm coming in 10 minutes, there's no point riding on wet tyres on a dry track for 10 minutes, because there's no point. So usually you do like Marc did at Kota. You decide, look, no, the track's changed. I need to change to the conditions as they are now. But you had guys like Miller, like Zarco, the guys that ended up, being in the best position, potentially anyway, in the case of Miller, were the guys that sort of took the long view and went with, let's wait for the race to come to us, trust the forecast, trust that it is going to get worse. And unfortunately for Miller, just at that crossover point where the track was starting to go towards the guys on the wet tyres, it all went wrong for him. But, I think obviously he's going to be gutted by that. So's Pramac, seeing, where Zarco went on to finish, obviously. But we do know that the Yamaha, in those kind of in-between conditions, it has got that sort of tricky bit of a weakness, you could say, isn't it? Where it's great when there's loads of grip in the dry. It can be great when there's loads of grip in the wet. But when you've got that crossover, greasy conditions, Quartararo's on the slicks, Miller's on the wets, and yet they both have accidents at the same time. Alex Rins goes into the pits, even though he was on the wets, wasn't he? He made the right choice, right, because he just felt the bike wasn't handy. I think Miller also was on the harder wet tyre. Zarco was on the soft. So, it was just one of those things. But just so many, twists and turns and tails throughout the grid, really, on Sunday, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Lewis, what do you make of... we got the rule regulation change after Kota last week, and then it comes straight into action this week. What do you make of the start with the... I could tell Marquez was going to come in. I could tell a load of them were. And then you seen the double long lap penalties flash up. It was kind of hard to work out who was doing what at points, because I think Marc actually said that he was trying to follow Alex into doing the first long lap, and then he actually nearly hit the back of Fermin Aldeguer, and he had to then continue on for another lap without doing one. It was really it was edge of your seat stuff, because you were trying to work out who was going to be the leader. Quartararo done his first, and then he dropped back to 6th. It was actually it was quite sort of tense at that point with the new rules. And I'm not saying it's going to be like that every time it happens. It'll be very rare, I think, that we're going to get this. Who knows? It probably happens at Silverstone now that I've said that. But it was quite sort of dramatic to watch, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was confusing. I think the first start, for me, it was obvious it was going to be aborted, because you could you could see the rain was getting worse. You could see that nobody was really very sure. And as soon as they set off, you were like, yeah, everyone's coming in. Nobody's going to risk it. But they were, even on that lap, they were still all very unsure. You could see people like Marc, Pecco, a lot of them were not wanting to lead. They were looking around. They were waiting for other people to make the decision. And I think this is the funny thing, is a lot of people are like, oh, we'll do what Marc Marquez does, which yes or no, but a lot of the time Marc is actually, he wants to see what other people do, because at the very least, if his rivals do something. Either he's going to do the same thing, or he's going to go, okay, well, I can do the opposite. So it's, there was a lot of strategy going on there, and then it got to the point where everyone came in, which was fair enough, aborted start, and then it dried out, and then you could tell there was going to be people that would maybe gamble, take the penalty on the chin, because ultimately you get a double long lap penalty. That's a 6-second penalty versus 40 odd to change bike.
Go for the pit lane,
which those who stayed out in the wet tyres, did. So yeah, it was confusing, and then obviously you've got the chaos of crashes, and then people out of position, and people with penalties. Because Bagnaia, for example, I thought his double long lap penalty was for the incident, so I was quite surprised when after the race he got a long lap penalty for the incident. I was like, well, I thought he'd already served one for the, but so because I'd actually missed at the time that he was one of the riders who'd come in for slick tyres, so it was confusing. I think, fair play to the Dorna television direction. They did a good enough job. They missed a few things, but they did a good enough job given the chaos. And I think the rules worked. Everyone knew what the situation was, which and that obviously stopped another quota situation on the grid where some people could have potentially left at that point, which would have been even, which I don't think is great, really. When you have an aborted start that way, it's better for people to go out and look at the conditions and go, okay, it's not actually as bad as we thought it was, we can go race. Because for a fan, you don't want to be sat there, things wait, and then it doesn't happen, and then you've got to, all the chaos of everyone coming back to pit lane and all the rest of it. So I think the new rules worked, everyone followed it, it made sense. I think the double long lap penalty is a fair recourse for that kind of, if you come in at the end of the warm-up lap. Because ultimately, it's one of those things, if others have made it... We saw at Le Mans what we should have seen in Austin with Agura and Binder and Bastianini, was that those who risked got the reward there, because with the double long lap penalties and then others having to come in as well, so it has kind of leveled things out and made things a bit better, which it was a good test of the new rules, and race direction did a really good job to keep up with all of that, and the steward's office did a really good job to keep up with all of that as well. You've got to add full credit to both, just to all parties there, because it was a day for things to go wrong, and I don't think they did get anything wrong.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know if it was planned, like the way they announced the rules. I was thinking, it's always ironic that things happen straight away. And I think, it was a good test of it. And I totally agree that's the way Coda should have been. And when you see it in action, you're thinking, we could have had a completely different race in Coda, and we could have maybe seen a rookie win a race with Ayagura. KTMs could have been at the front. That's the thing. And yeah, it's good to know for the future now that this is what we're going to get. So yeah, I think that the opening laps with Quartararo and stuff crashing was you've seen the despair of the crowd, and oddly, I will mention now, I think with Quartararo, he has the 10 minutes suspended penalty for Silverstone in FP1 for ignoring the marshals. There's a video going around on social media. Fabio was kind of being naughty and not letting him take his bike because he wanted to get going again, but yeah, that's people messaging saying, why has he got this penalty? I'm like, well, look at what he was doing. It was a live track. There was bikes coming round. He was in a dangerous spot, so I think he can count himself quite lucky there in terms of, it's only 10 minutes of practice. Like, essentially, it's like crashing in practice, isn't it, and getting back to the garage sort of thing. That's kind of the punishment there for Fabio. But we'll talk about the championship now, Pete. Marc Marquez had a weekend of, I think it was very reminiscent. I said to Lewis before, it reminded me of Assen 2016 a little bit. The way he kind of thought about the risk in the championship, and he'd seen where his rivals were, and he thought P2's fine for me considering the mistake I made at Jerez. Winning the sprint, and I will say 6 in a row, first time anyone's ever done that in the MotoGP sprint era. He's got a 22-point lead now over his brother, who was second in the sprint but obviously crashed out of the Grand Prix, and 51 over Pecco now, who suffered 2 non-scores. He DNF'd in the sprint, and he finished 16th yesterday after getting caught up in the incident at turn 3. A big day in the championship. It almost felt like, okay, this is where Mark's kind of showing now, where he's thinking ahead, and he looked not gutted about finishing second, but you could tell he was like over the line. He gave a little fist pump and he was like, well, that's one out the way sort of thing. And considering the weekend that his rivals had, he can come away from Le Mans into Silverstone thinking, right, this is the time to kind of build on that even more, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right there to mention the rivals, isn't it? Because it wasn't just a good weekend for Marc; it was a bad weekend for them. You know, we saw Alex and Pecco would come into this round having scored in every race, and yet they'd leave it having had the accidents, the mistakes, which Marc was just trying to get over, wasn't he? So Marc put it behind him, and now they've had the setbacks that he's had to get over. So. It all went his way, really, didn't it? I mean, apart from the pole position, Quartararo, I suppose, if we stick with him just for a bit, I mean, incredible lap. Although I think probably his opening lap in that sprint race was even more fantastic. I mean, to take about 0.7 of a second out of Marc Marquez on the opening lap. And as you say, Marc went on to win the sprint, and he was quicker than Quartararo, I think, everywhere from lap 2, but it just took him till halfway through the race to make up that gap that Quartararo got on the first lap. It really showed that they've been able to get the bite from the tyres, the new tyres, with the Yamaha. We saw it in qualifying as well. So whether that's Max Bartolini bringing over some of those tricks from Ducati or something that helps him get the most out of the new tyres. But either way, really impressive for Quartararo, that the pole position and that opening lap in the sprint. But after that, really, from then on, even going into Sunday, it all went Marc's way, didn't it? And as you say, the sprint win, something that he wasn't that great at sprints, was he, previously? And yet now he's unbeaten, as you say, a new record. We all thought of Marc as the Sunday guy, the race guy, and yet it's gone better for him on Saturday so far. But anyway, I'm sure he'll take it either way. But as you say, the key thing, and Lewis mentioned this as well, he managed the damage limitation, I think was his words, wasn't it, after the race? He kept an eye on his rivals. He kept an eye on Alex, wasn't it? I think he said, when Alex pulled in, he was watching what Alex's strategy was. As you say, the whole time he's thinking, what are these other guys doing? So that he didn't make, whatever he did, it wasn't going to be a big mistake relative to his rivals. So even though, as we saw, there were other guys that picked the better bike strategy in terms of the wet tyres, the guys that he's raced against for the championship were, apart from Pecco, obviously, he went with the wets, but didn't get far. I suppose we should say that turn 1, I mean, it's mayhem anyway, isn't it, with the lack of ride height devices? But then when you've got riders on, some on slicks, some on wets, all braking at different points, I mean...
It was, you could really see it, couldn't you?
It's going to be really sketchy. And I think, because there was a note, wasn't there, in the Bastianini penalty that he's got for Silverstone, that the one more long lap, that normally it's a double long lap if you cause an accident in those early laps, because they really try and clamp down on it. With bikes all around you, obviously in the early laps you tend to get punished more, but they gave him a single long lap rather than the double one. Didn't actually mention why, but I think that was probably the mitigating circumstances, was just the riders being on different types of tyres and everything else. So but yeah, Bagnaia nightmare. Alex crashing out twice, actually, didn't he, in the Grand Prix? He was on for a good result, wasn't he? So he was also doing a good damage limitation ride, but unfortunately fell twice in those closing stages. So, and Marc now walks away with that nice big buffer, which is exactly what you want if these situations arise in future, isn't it? Having that buffer of knowing, look, if things don't go my way, it doesn't really matter. It just takes that bit of pressure off, doesn't it? And so things firmly swung back towards Marc, I think, this weekend.
Interesting, isn't it, Lewis, with Marc, how he kind of flicked the switch after the mistake at RF. He said a really interesting thing with the comment in the press conference that he's 80% sure he would have crashed if he didn't make the mistake at RF, and it's kind of helped him in this sense now that everything was through at him in the Grand Prix in terms of he got double long lap penalties. The conditions were very tricky, and it's like he says, it could have been easy for him just to crash because he can't help himself sometimes, and he knows what he wants to do. And Zarco kind of said, I seen that you were kind of closing, you were 8 seconds, and then Marc was like, it wasn't worth me pushing. I think that is the difference here with Marc. I think he's realised that once his rivals were covered, nothing else really matters in that sense, and that's, to me, that's championship mode. You're thinking about, just bagging points over the rest. And it actually has paid off really nicely for him in this instance. Yeah,
100%. He kind of spent the whole... I think the Jerez thing has weighed on him a lot heavier than maybe we realised, because he spoke about it a lot, and he was really, really keen after Friday, after Saturday, to be like, I'm not the favourite. I was favourite in Austin, Jerez, I crashed. I think he knew that he sort of knew that he was sort of pissing points into the wind at this point, because he's fast on the bike, but he's kind of making stupid mistakes by being too impatient, and I think it's frustrated him because he knows he should be better than that. So Le Mans was a real test of that, and Lucio Cecchinello said that in these kind of conditions we sort of thought Marc would be he's usually the reference in these conditions. So when Zarco was pulling away from him, we were quite worried, actually. We were like, oh God, he's going to crash. I think, as Marc said, he pushed it for the first couple of laps when he was on the wet tyres, couldn't really get the gap down significantly enough to not have to continue to risk it and let it go, really. He had Alex Marquez covered, Pecco was down, and obviously both of them ended up not scoring points anyway.
Yeah.
That was a big day for him. He was lucky in a sense, though, because with the whole long lap stuff, there was a point when Alex Marquez ran wide, and that allowed Fermin Aldeguer to go through into the lead. He went round for another lap when Alex Marquez and Marc both pitted, and I think that would have caused a problem for Marc later on, because
100%.
Aldeguer's pace was pretty much the same as Marc's, and with a maiden MotoGP podium on the line, much like Assen when Jack Miller came through, I don't think Marc would have forced the issue, so he would have lost another 4 points there. So he had a bit of luck, on his side there with the tight rivals, with Aldeguer just being a bit wet behind the ears, really, because had Aldeguer pitted at the same time, regardless if he was leading or not, that probably would have been a different story. So he's the opportunity's presented itself. He's taken it, and now he's 22 points in the lead of the championship. He's 51 clear of Pecco, and he goes, he had to pace it for Le Mans in the dry. That's the other thing. He leaves Le Mans, which has not been a weak circuit for him over the years, but it's not maybe been one of his stronger ones in the same way that somewhere like Jerez has been over the years, or, even Silverstone's always been a good circuit for him. So now he goes forward with that kind of knowledge. We've got Aragon coming up as well, which we know how good he is around those types of tracks. So he's learning, he's learned, and that's a problem for the rest of them, because he's fast. He's now accepting of where the limits are and when to push and when not to push. And, Alex Marquez has made mistakes. Pecco's made mistakes and isn't on the same kind of pace as Marc. So, I think we are now just going to start to see Marc stretch his legs.
Absolutely. I think that's it. I just tell mentality-wise, he was just like, I've had enough of this now, sort of thing. It's like, and once you make the one mistake, yes, in Coda it was his mistake, but like you say, Lewis, he talked about Jerez a lot after, and he's been like, he even said in that conference yesterday, he's like, if I'd have won, like he's saying, because he can't even, I've never heard him say, if I'd have won that, like, you can tell it's digging at him, think I should have won that race. And they actually said to the media, being like, yeah, it actually helped me not winning that. And like, this is like the thing now, because he knows if he just does what he does and like has that reserve, I mean, this championship's going to be over fairly soon, I think.
It says a lot about a racer as well, that at 32 years old, with all the success that Marc has had over the years, the fact that he's still willing to adapt and willing to learn these lessons and not just go, I'm the greatest of all time, because other riders have been guilty of that, in the past over the years. You get to a certain point where I don't need to learn anything else. Marc's almost treating this championship like it's his first.
It's odd. I find it very, very, because he's won so many of them, and you think, why, you're on the best bike, sort of thing. It's almost like he just, it's odd, isn't it, Pete? It's a good point, that.
I suppose he's never been on the best bike.
Well,
really?
for a season and a bit, I'd say maybe. But it's odd that his mentality is kind of to protect himself almost, and like to think he's not the best. It's weird, isn't it, that sort of mentality?
It is, although you reminded me there. I think if Marc does win it this year, and let's face it, he looks like he's on course at the moment, it'll be the biggest gap between titles that there's ever been in the Premier class. I think Casey Stoner previously, obviously Valentino Rossi got close, didn't he? We won't go there. But,
well, we'll save that for another day. Yeah.
Yeah. But in terms of, it'll be the biggest gap. So that maybe that is why it fits in with what you guys are saying about it feeling like his first title, because no one's ever won it after having such a long break since their last title in the Premier class. And the approach to the strategy, just coming back to that, I think with these new rules, the double long lap, as you guys have been saying, that's a much smaller penalty than a ride isn't it? So I think in future we are more likely to see riders ducking in and swapping bikes off the grid, because the penalty is just nowhere near as big as it was before for doing that. So perhaps what we saw on Sunday, that will now be studied, won't it, by the teams? They'll be looking at, right, what did we lose? Could we have done anything better? That'll be the template, won't it? They'll be running through all the scenarios, and I think in future, yeah, we all need to be, all of us, as whether we're media fans or whatever, need to be used to more of these kind of tactics. And you know that Marc will be on top of that as much as anyone. You know, he'll be studying, right, how did it go wrong for me here? What point could I have done something different? You know, with knowing what I did at the time, whether that means looking at the forecast. You know, maybe he'll. We should say we saw the cameras, didn't we? Filming him again. We know after Austin there was that sort of unseen footage that came out. Maybe that more of that will come out this week from Dorna. That'll be interesting to see. What was the discussion that was going on the grid? What was the information he was being given by Ducati? Did it match the reality of the forecasts as it happened? We know that other teams got it pretty much exactly spot on as far as the rain, but we don't know. I mean, did they get it right? And Marc sort of overruled it and went, no, I think I need to go with the slicks because that's the conditions now. Or was he being told, look, we don't think it's going to last? We don't know yet. But anyway, this race will be a big sort of studying point, I think, for everybody. And you know that Marc, who squeezes everything out of every situation, will be going through it this week and, making his plans for the future.
Absolutely. Wait for that unseen video because I imagine there's something good there. I've seen a few things with Pecco Bagnaia's side. I've seen Christian Gabarini he was getting a bit sort of, like, you could tell that everyone was on edge with tyre choice, and yeah, I hope that Dorna have been able to capture that because I think those videos are the best thing they actually have in terms of content, and they really give you an insight of how chaotic that people they work in chaos essentially, and they have to make these calls to get it right, and yeah, it's the nature of the sport, so it is. And Fermin Aldeguer I will come on to, Lewis. I think 2 third places, his pace has been really good since Coda, and his results maybe haven't shown it. He crashed out at Jerez when he was in really good positions, and this weekend he just looked like he was like just ready for anything. I was really impressed with his sprint performance. His battle with Fabio Quartararo I thought was great. So it was. They were taking little sort of digs at each other and everything. It was a bit of contact that was nice. I thought it was good racing, and to do what he did, as you kind of touched on, if he probably had a pit it with Marc and Alex, he would have been second because he had nothing to lose. And I think the Gresini team have landed themselves a gem here because last year I was probably one of them saying, like, well, Ducati maybe jumped the gun too early on selecting this guy. But now he's like so, like, I don't know, it's hard to describe how actually good he is because when you watch him, he's just very aggressive in the sense, but he looks very controlled at times. He's so, yeah, he's doing something on the 24 that Alex is doing too, and there's a trend here with that bike and Gresini that they have got such a nice team here, and they're profiting everything out of what they have essentially. It's a good weekend for them, isn't it?
Well, full credit to crew chief, I guess, Frankie Carcetti. I mean, he's a big kind of part of that success story. And yeah, I agree. Like, I did think that when they, you know, halfway through last year, it looked like Ducati had really jumped the gun on that one because Aldeguer just wasn't very impressive. And, you know, now it can be put to the back of everyone's mind, okay, it must have just been the Pirelli tyres, you know, whatever. We kind of, there's that sort of element of doubt now that given how good he's been on MotoGP, you can kind of reasonably go, okay, well, it must have been the tyres, you know, it must have, whatever, you know.
Just thinking, because he was signed so early, like, thinking about being in MotoGP probably was just like, even before the season had begun, that probably plays into it as well.
It's worth remembering at the time as well, he was kind of meant to be a factory rider on a factory bike at Pramac when the contract was signed. And,
right, yeah.
You know, it wasn't until much later in the season that he was eventually placed at Gresini on a year-old bike. So, you know, there was a lot of moving parts there. But yeah, he has just kind of quietly been impressive, you know, this season. In the last couple of rounds especially, the speed's been there. I think, you know, I think to do what he did on Sunday in conditions he's never seen before. Because remember when we had that first flag-to-flag race at Le Mans in 2021, for quite a lot of people, like Quartararo, for Joan Mir and people like that, they screwed it up big time. They really didn't get it right. You know, but Quartararo ended up with penalty. I think Mir ended up crashing on the way in, if I remember rightly.
It was an absolute disaster. I remember they get the pit lane.
I don't think Pecco got it right either. I think there was a lot, like, they kind of were confronted with that, and they were like, oh, I don't really know what to do here. Aldeguer did a great job. He kind of obviously was looking around at what everyone else was doing, decided, okay, those guys are coming, I'm going to come in for the slicks. And then kept the pace up on those slicks with the leaders, served his penalties when he needed to serve them. You know, he was Yeah, inherited the lead because Mark took a penalty and Alex ran wide, but he was right behind them. It wasn't as if he'd just kind of stumbled across it. He was sticking with them, and so he was in the right place to do it. And I think it was unfortunate that he led because, like we say, I think it kind of stopped him from finishing second. And who knows, maybe he would have just absolutely gone for it.
Yeah.
You know, his average pace wasn't as quick as Zarco's, to be fair, but maybe in a position to win a Grand Prix, he might have just turned the lights off and went for it. And in those situations when you're a rookie, you don't know what's going to happen.
You get a free pass if you're a rookie, I think, in that situation. Just go out and do it.
Exactly. So, but yeah, I think to do what he did in those conditions, to be as consistently fast in both conditions as well over the weekend is impressive. And I think, you know, let's see what happens when we go to Silverstone, somewhere that the GP24 really performs well, where, you know, that could be another really good weekend for him.
Circuit he likes too. He's also won there in Moto 2.
It just seems like it's all coming together now. He's got the bike set up the way he wants it. The team's working around him. The bike's obviously a great bike, and that helps a rookie a lot. You know, you look at someone like Aldeguer, for example. They are on a factory Aprilia, trying to develop a factory Aprilia on the backdrop of not having the reference rider, the world champion, within the manufacturer right now. So, yeah, you can understand why things are difficult there. And obviously, Chantra wasn't on the grid in Le Mans due to injury. So, but yeah, it's definitely things have shifted in this Rookie of the Year battle where Aldeguer's really kind of put himself in that lead position now.
Absolutely. I think I predicted him to be Rookie of the Year, and I kind of surprised myself how quickly he's kind of adapted, because Agur was the guy at the gates, and I think that's why it's kind of taken me by surprise that maybe it shouldn't, because he is on the GP24, but the way his developments went like that almost. And like I say, I plugged it a few times this year, but listen to what Frankie Carcetti said last year to us. He says about if you can get to every Grand Prix and you see a market improvement, it just keeps going up and up and up. The problem is when they get to the top straight away, and it's kind of like that now for expectation-wise. Does Fermin go to every Grand Prix and expect have to be on the podium now or have to be in the top 5? We'll have to see with his mentality, but I think it was a brilliant weekend for him, and to I think get one over on his. I think they're both from Murcia, Pedro Acosta as well. I think there's that'll take some satisfaction from him. Lastly, I just want to talk about Pecco's weekend. What do you say? I'd say it's his worst weekend in maybe 3 years. Maybe I was thinking back. He has the crash in the sprint where he says he just doesn't know what happens. The front just went, and he didn't know. He couldn't really explain the issue. Then you get to Sunday where it looks like he's made actually the right call on the grid. Gets caught up in an incident with Bastianini. I think it kind of sums up Pecco's season, doesn't it? And it all just came here at the worst possible time, just as he's looking to, build after a test. He's admitted now that the bike is not giving him the feeling that he wants compared to last year. And it's essentially admitting that Mark is riding around the problems and he can't adapt. 51 points off Mark now. It's going to be tough for Pecco, isn't it?
It's all got a lot more complicated, isn't it? I think that was sort of the feeling. It was, as you say, multiple things happening at Le Mans with the bike. This, as you say, saying that I'm going to have to change. We're not going to be able to change the bike. I think it's the opening rounds. They weren't easy ones to compare with last year, were they? Because you had Thailand move to the start of the year. You had Argentina coming back. Cota's Cota. Qatar's a night race. But then we've had Jerez and Le Mans. Same time of year, same type of tyres. And I think it's becoming clearer now that, and we also had, I suppose we could throw in Digia complaining about the front end feeling this weekend. So you've got these sort of concerns, these problems he's having with the front end. There must have been some people that probably thought, look, Pecco, you're saying the front end's a problem, but you're getting points. You're up there every time. Maybe it's okay. Then comes the crash in the sprint. Well, that proves that he is on the limit, and that then suddenly takes into another dimension, doesn't it? Where, okay, you've got a lack of feeling and you are really close to crashing. Obviously went over the line and crashed. The Sunday thing with Bastianini, that was just a racing thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't his fault.
No, that's it. It's just one of those, when it rains, it pours, isn't it? But yeah, so it's... And then you put in, as you guys have been saying, things like Aldeguer on the GP24. So you've now got all the 3 guys on the GP24 have been on the podium this year. So that bike's really strong. Presumably, they're looking at the data directly now at Le Mans. Pecco's looking at his data from last year. He's looking at the data of 3 fast guys on the GP24 with Morbidelli as well. And he's seeing these differences. And I think it's I think we can also throw into this, they've lost Martin, they've lost Bastianini, two other guys that could have done the same step as Pecco in going GP24 to GP25. He's the only guy who's made that step, isn't he?
Yeah.
The other guys, Mark and Didier, they've come from the 23, which, should we call it tricky to ride? Yeah, So, of course, for them, the bike's better. And then you add to that Mark is Mark. So, as we know from his Honda days, you can't base, it's like basing the Ducati around what Casey Stoner was doing on it, isn't it? You almost have to exclude Mark from the sort of the average or the norm for the bike, I think. And maybe that's what Pecco was getting at with that comment of he could ride anything. Interesting one, that. The last time I heard a rider say that I can think of was Jorge Lorenzo talking about Casey Stoner at a Sepang test ages ago, like over 10 years ago when Casey was still racing, and someone said to him, look at Casey's lap times, and Jorge just said, look, Casey could ride a bicycle around here fast, and it was a similar kind of thing where you almost, there's no point drawing any conclusions from what Casey was doing on the Ducati, I think he was at the time, and what Mark's doing on it now almost. And I think there are questions for Ducati as to why they have now Pecco not being able to get this feeling. You've got Didier also having problems. The 24's all strong, and then we heard this confirmation from Tardozzi that the 25 engine is different. So, we were led to believe that the choice was sort of the original 25, if we can call it that, or the 24 engine. Now we realise that they've gone with this sort of hybrid one in the middle, a combination of both. We don't know exactly how it's different, but of course that means that it can't be changed. The engine is frozen, so they can change everything else on the bike, but pretty much, we've got to see now. Is this going to be a recurring theme at other tracks? What sort of changes are going to be needed? And as I say, complicate. I think it's got even more complicated for Pecco after this weekend.
It has. Interesting comment, isn't it, Lewis, about looking at the data? Do you think that's actually hurting Pecco more, looking at his 24, thinking, I should be doing that, when really Ducati should be like, forget about it, it's last year. These riders have this bike for a reason. You're the factory guy. You should be able to get around this. Whether it is hard. I mean, he's an incredible rider, but he should be able to just go, I need to find this myself. And he has said, to his credit, I'm trying to find it. But he can't be thinking back, looking, going, I should be doing that still. It's different this year, isn't it? Every year is always going to be different. And it doesn't help, as Pete says, not having the reference point of Bastianini, Martin making that jump with him, because Mark's getting on it going, oh look, shiny new factory bike, happy days, and this thing does everything better than my 23. He needs to think that he's the guy that's to lead it, because he is in that team for the reason. That's why they've kept him instead of, say, Jorge Martin, for example. He needs to make sure that he can just his mentality needs to switch, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, playing devil's advocate, Pecco can say, well, I can see others doing on the GP24 what I used to be able to do. Well, you didn't score 8 times last year and lost the championship, so yeah, looking backwards doesn't really a good thing, because okay, you're saying that you'd have a better feeling on that bike, but yeah, there was a lot of times you made mistakes, so yeah, it's a tricky one. And I think he's just too lost in his head now, and I think Ducati have kind of admitted that. I think Livio Suppo asked Davide Tardozzi on Italian television or something like that at Spain, and they asked him, is Pecco's confidence is largely just a confidence thing now? And I think Ducati are kind of saying, yeah, I think so, because they've said all season that, like, we're trying to fix the bike, but like, there's not, because this front end thing was brought up before after Thailand or Argentina, and Ducati kind of said, like, we're doing what we can, but you are a world champion, you do have to ride around it. And I think now Pecco's realised that. I think he's obviously been the one that's been like, well, something will come from the bike, it can't be me, the bike will come to me. And then eventually he's now realised, obviously after Jerez, the test, it is me, and it's effectively reset his championship 6 rounds in, which is a bit of a nightmare really, because you've got Marquez doing Marquez things. I think I think things can only get better from this point now that he's realised that, but there's going to be a real delicate situation for Ducati management now to navigate the next few rounds, because the next few rounds will really determine the rest of the season. If they can't get him and get his head through the next few rounds into a place where it needs to be, the championship isn't going to happen. It isn't. Pecco Bagnaia fans have been chirping me all week on Twitter since, Jerez being like, oh, I bet this will happen, I bet this. He's 51 points behind now. A 2022 repeat isn't going to happen if he's the way he is right now in his head, unable to ride the bike, unable to ride around it, constantly saying, Marquez can ride anything. That's not what you should be saying. You should be saying, okay, he's the reference. I'm a world champion. I can do what he can do on this bike. I just need time. But he doesn't have time because, we're into the season now. We've got Silverstone coming up. You need a good front end at Silverstone. It's a fast-flowing circuit. I think really we're looking at now Pecco getting to Aragon and hoping he can get through the next 2 rounds as good as he can, and then hoping beyond hope that he could. Now he knows what he has to do on the bike, that he can figure it out on that Monday test in Aragon, because otherwise that's it. It's game over. It's not going to come back, because when you've got to a point where you can't ride a bike the way you want to, but you're also mentally kind of beaten down by it, that's just a negative spiral. And bringing up the Jorge Lorenzo example again, remember what happened to him in 2019?
Oh, he soon found out what it's like going up against.
Well, there was that, and on a bike that was difficult to ride, and he needed to adapt around it. And Honda always said from the outset back then, we're not going to change the bike the way Ducati did for him. He has to adapt to the bike, and and it killed Lorenzo's career essentially. I'm not saying the same thing will happen to Bagnaia, but he needs to be careful that he doesn't walk into that by just kind of getting too lost in his head, because that will happen. There's a rider that is more than capable, and it was unfortunate the weekend as well, because he was on the right tyre and he deserved a lot more than what he came away with. And whether it was the podium, I don't know. His pace kind of when in that race on wet tyres wasn't as good as those podium riders, but we were in a situation where he'd been in the pits several times. He'd having blue flags, stuff like that. It was a complete, and just mindset was that he wasn't going to do anything because he was a lap down. So, it's not truly representative. You'd like to think if he was in a podium position, he was going to be there. But he did also say that the front end, the feelings he has in the dry are even worse than the wet. So you are looking at a situation where was he even going to get to the finish, given everything, given that. And I think, it's just, like I say, I don't think it can get any worse, but the next few rounds are pretty critical to him salvaging, to be, at least be able to challenge properly for the championship. But equally, I don't want this to become a thing of, well, here's the excuse. You've got to ride around a bike. We look at what Marc did on the GP23 last year, a bike that, and it wasn't even really the proper GP23. It was a start of the year version of the GP23 that was even worse than the end of the year version of 23 that Pecco and Martin were riding. So he came through from 13 to almost win the French Grand Prix last year, and did that results like that repeatedly. So. I totally agree. You got to ride around it.
Exactly, and that's it. And I want to point out the Ducati GP25 is not like the Honda of old. It's not like it's a terrible, but it's the best bike on the grid. I'm convinced in that. The 24, yes, a lot of riders, as you rightly say, they've all had podiums on it this year. But when you look at yes, I know it's Marc winning on it, but it's won what? I can't even add up many races it's won now.
5 sprints. 4 Grand Prix.
Six sprints, 4 Grand Prix. It's won a lot, essentially. I think that Pecco just has to just kind of do what he was doing in terms of looking at Qatar, for example. He needs to just ride like that and just get podiums and just hope that he can find something when we get to tracks maybe it'll confidence-wise, Mugello Aston will do something for him. He can kind of step out of the bike's a problem, and he can just mask it with his riding around those circuits. But yeah, it's been a tough week for Pecco, and let's see what happens when we get to Silverstone, which it's up next, and we'll all be there, and we'll have plenty of content from there. But next week we'll have the preview for Silverstone, and who knows what's going to come out of that one. Things in MotoGP can change very fast in the news cycle, and we'll be back next week with another podcast. And if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. Until then, we'll see you next time.